My guest today is Andy Thomas. For 35 years, he has been one of the few people in Britain reading the case file on the things the mainstream culture refuses to look at. Crop circles, cover-ups, ghosts, UFOs, the everyday paranormal. He has written 11 books on those subjects, including Vital Signs, which is still regarded as the standard reference on crop circles, and Strange, his most recent. He has organised the Glastonbury Symposium since 1990. He has lectured thousands of times across the UK, the United States and the rest of the world. And what makes his work different is the one thing that the rest of the conversation has lost: balance. He reads the evidence, presents both sides and lets you decide. And today, I want to find out what 35 years of doing that has actually taught him. Let's begin. Before we get into it, if you find these conversations worth your time, a like and a subscribe really do help the channel grow. And with all that said, here is Andy Thomas. Hello and welcome to the Joe Questions podcast. Today I'm joined by Andy Thomas, who has written many books on a wide range of topics, from UFOs to ghosts to conspiracies, crop circles and cover-ups. His books include Vital Signs and his most recent book, Strange, Paranormal Realities in the Everyday World. He also organises the Glastonbury Symposium. He runs the Crop Circle Research Archive, and he has a website called The Truth Agenda. Andy, it's a pleasure to be joined by you. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on here.
So I initially reached out to you because I wanted to explore crop circles. It's something that I've been looking into a lot recently. I'm from Wiltshire. I feel a particular personal connection to this phenomena, but I'd also love to talk to you about all these other strange things that you research, because I find them all fascinating. And ultimately, the reason I start this podcast is because I have a lot of questions, and I think that's what we should be doing. We should be asking questions and exploring these topics. So how did you get into this area yourself?
So, I've always had a general interest in kind of the mysterious, but for me, it was finding crop circles back in 1991 that suddenly connected me directly to it. And I was just astonished at how many there were, certainly back then, and that not a single person that I met then could tell me where they came from. And there was something in the pit of my stomach that just made me feel, I need to know more about this. And I joined the research teams, and then, of course, found people in that world were researching other mysteries too. Over the years, it kind of drew me to become aware that, well, there's more to this clearly than meets the eye. And if that's the case with crop circles, that must be the case with all these other phenomena as well. So before I knew it, I was exposed to a whole world of investigating strange phenomena. And I discovered the best thing I could do was try to share it with people through talks and eventually writing books and things, and get a discussion going, because there's not enough of that in the mainstream media. So trying to get this out there and be looked at seriously, I thought was something I just felt passionately about, and here I am today.
Yeah. And you mentioned the mainstream media. What do you think it is particularly about the mainstream media that doesn't want to discuss all of these topics seriously?
There's the argument that it's the conspiracy version, that they are ordered not to take it seriously. The other version that I tend more towards on the whole, with some exceptions, is that I think especially the British media are innately sceptical. I don't know why. Somewhere down the line, they will publish a story on something paranormal when it suits them to fill a bit of space. But on the whole, it's like they can't really bring themselves to do anything other than to try to debunk it. Or certainly that's been the case for many years. And that's, I think, a habit. It's habit forming. And so anything that comes their way that is like that, they just presume instantly, well, it's probably a load of old rubbish. And that then means they don't portray it properly. Like, you'll do a show, I've done many TV shows where, you'll get lots of good researchers there, and they'll be giving them information. When you watch the final thing, more than 50% of that show will be skeptics. So it just seems to be the way they're angled. It would be very nice if they could become more open-minded. There's a little bit of a shift in more recent times, and especially with more UFO disclosure apparently on the horizon. But there's still a long way to go. And it would be nice if they would take it a little bit more seriously than they do.
Yeah, you mentioned disclosure. There's obviously the famous movie coming out today at the time of recording. Do you think we are nearing a point of disclosure of some kind?
So there definitely now is a program of disclosure. It's a scratch of the surface. And, whatever anybody thinks of him, Donald Trump has been, interestingly, part of releasing information. Whether it's a good distraction, we don't know. However, although some of it is very mundane, what they're releasing, not all of it is. There is footage in there that is pretty extraordinary, showing objects flying around, doing things that no known human craft does. And just the fact that they've even started down that road does strongly suggest that it's going to be quite hard to stop. Maybe they think we'll do a little bit and then nobody will be interested, but I think the opposite is going to be true, because what they're now demonstrating is that, in effect, there has been a cover-up for long years, which of course most people in the UFO stroke UAP world, they know that already. But the mainstream media is now, of course, having to think, okay, maybe we're going to have to take this a little bit more seriously. But even there, the British media plays it down. The American media does seem more on it, because that's where the disclosure is coming from. And of course, the new movie by Spielberg that I haven't seen yet, it's certainly creating new discussion about it, which is not a bad thing. And somewhere down the line, given that they've been having congressional hearings with whistleblowers and, all this footage is coming out, that there is going to have to be a more serious public discussion about this. And where that goes, I don't know, but I think it's a good thing that it is happening.
How coordinated do you think the cover-up is? And how do you think it is possible to cover up something like this? Does it intercept into the media, the military, all of these things? Is it one group doing this? Is it multiple conspiracies that seem to be converging? How do you think it plays out?
Well, it looks like there's factions in high office, and then especially America. I mean, I'm sure there's UFO stuff going on all around the world. We know there is. But the push for disclosure seems to be American at the moment. So just to focus on them. But there's clearly a lot of reasons why some would not want it to come out. For those that believe they are creating new technology based on extraterrestrial technology, of course they don't want to reveal that too soon, because by doing that they lose the strategic advantage they want. There's also a commercial advantage. So a lot of people have associated with UFO cover-ups with companies like Lockheed Martin, people like that. There's a lot of big money and power behind this. They don't want that spilling out until they're ready and they can take maximum advantage. But there is another viewpoint that they're also concerned about what the public would think about this. And, there's a lot of rumors that actually, what this is all about is much more threatening and darker than we might like to think that it is, rather than it all being friendly aliens here to say hello. But whether that's, again, just a deflection to put us off, or whether there is a truth to that, I don't know. Plus, you've got religious factions, especially in America. You have a lot of, very fundamentalist Christian people. I'm not saying they shouldn't be, but they are there in power. And already, J.D. Vance, the vice president, has announced, and why this hasn't had more coverage, I don't know, that he doesn't think they're aliens, but he thinks they're demons. So you're going to get a whole religious agenda coming in here that's going to make it very uncomfortable for certain truths to come out. And I think that even if there was a big announcement tomorrow, about, aliens are here, or are they demons, there's going to be immediately massive debate and confusion that will go on for years. So it won't resolve anything. It will open up, I think, a whole difficult world. In terms of how you do a cover-up, that's been really easy, because most of the public, they're busy with their own lives. They're weighted down with difficulties, and they're not thinking about things like UFOs, ghosts, psychic phenomena, or the paranormal mostly, and they're presented constantly with distraction from the World Cup to big celebrity gossip, and that fills their heads, and that's encouraged, I think, to keep us off the scent. So it's not that hard to mount cover-ups. However, now that the whistleblowers are coming from quite a high level, I think that is changing things, because you can't keep forever saying, oh, they're just a maverick. It seems to be one after the other now. And you've got Congress people like Tim Burchett, Congresswoman Luna, who are coming forward now saying, okay, we now need to talk about this. So, these aren't fools. And sooner or later, they're going to have to be taken much more seriously than they are.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned demons, and it's definitely something you hear about, but I've never really, I don't think it's been as widely considered to be a real thing since the Dark Ages, perhaps. I think that sort of demon thread went away from society, was less prevalent, and people probably thought it's not really real. But I feel like there's a lot more conversation around things that are demonic and dark. And if you look at things like the Epstein files, a lot of that seems to revolve around demonic entities trying to bring about spiritual forces through occult practices. And that's a kind of cover up. Do you think this demonic angle and the alien angle, are they separate? Do you think the people doing the UFO cover-ups are the same people doing the Epstein file cover-ups, or do you think it is one broad cabal, a sort of a cult group of people who have access to a different kind of knowledge to the rest of us?
So, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of conspiracy ideas that it is one cabal doing all of this. Personally, I suspect it's messier than that. I think there's factions within factions, and I don't think they're all working for the same aims, in my view, from what I can see. Either way, though, you're left with, clearly there are certain things not being portrayed to the public correctly. I mean, QAnon, and what the hell was all that about? We still don't know. I mean, they put about a lot of things about satanic pedophiles and all of this, and it got very dark. I think that's left a legacy that there is a satanic plot going on here, which has now been attached to Epstein and that. I mean, it's unclear what the truth of that is. However, what it does say is that people are open to the idea that there are these very dark agendas. And certainly, I mean, I think the world of religious sort of belief has got sucked into this. So the whole are aliens demons or are they angels? And there's another idea there. It has got woven together. And I think that is evidence that we still live in a world that hasn't really moved on that much from the old mythologies. I know we like to think we're all very scientifically rational now, but in more recent years, there's been a turning away from science. People are going back more to what they know. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's the reality of what has occurred here. And so now it's very hard to separate it out and know what the truth of it is. Suffice to say that there is something going on there. And clearly, I mean, just take UFOs. There has clearly been cover-ups. And probably going back to Roswell and beyond. They managed to ridicule Roswell and talk about weather balloons for years. It's now becoming clear from the people that have been researching that and from the sheer number of people that have gone on record about what they saw there, that there was a huge cover-up. Whether it was alien or something else, it wasn't a weather balloon. And of course, the more you do that, and all the other cases that are quite like that, in the end, the more people won't trust you. And it's clear now from this very, very early seam of disclosure that we're getting that clearly there is a lot more to know. And we've only seen the beginning of this now. Where that's going to go is on one level fascinating, but on the other level, it's potentially troubling because all the different factions are going to leap on it and try to use it for their own ends to justify their beliefs. So it's probably going to be, it's messy on the inside, I suspect, with the people trying to hold it down. It's going to be messy on the outside. And I suspect we're looking at decades, if not centuries, of a lot of confusion and arguing once more of this stuff does go public.
Yeah. I'm sure you're the same as me. I'm open-minded and I'm happy to absorb new information around a topic. But I find one of the issues nowadays is that, say, if it's like JFK's assassination or the moon landing or Epstein's death, or there's multiple theories now around an incident, and they all sound plausible and they all kind of make sense. So now you have to almost be able to hold all of these theories together, but you don't really know the answer, and also you never probably will know the answer. So then we live in this world where there's multiple layers of truth narratives that people have. Sometimes they think JFK was killed by this group, sometimes it was that group, and then you're almost left to the point where you're just overwhelmed by these options.
Well, I mean, in my book, Conspiracies, which tells the history of conspiracies, this isn't new. We should sort of acknowledge that. The difference we're in today is that information moves fast, of course, and misinformation moves fast, and that makes it very difficult to tell the difference. But it's been like that, maybe forever. I mean, if you go back to the Roman times, there were constantly rumors and conspiracy thinking, and some of it was real, of course, endless plots, assassinations, intrigues going on at high levels. Most people realized that. They knew that they were rarely told the truth by the powers that be, but, if you wanted to keep your head, you kept your head down. So it's always been like that, and you find that throughout all centuries. And then once the printing press gets invented, people then start to release their own information and pamphleteering. And even back then, well, you didn't know if it was true or not, but if one pamphlet got really widely distributed, more people, by the law of averages, were likely to believe it. And so now with social media, that's kind of accelerated that process. So I think there's always been that element of you don't know what the truth is. You could sort of balance it with probabilities more, perhaps better in the old days. Yeah, now there's such overwhelm. All you can do is see, is there a case to be discussed at all? Sometimes it's clear there is. And there are some areas of conspiracy speculation that very clearly, the truth has not been told, and they have every right to do that. Other ones grow seemingly from nothing. In the end, there has to be some evidence. And I've always been quite keen on being evidence-based rather than rumour. If somebody has a belief, I'll hear them out, and I'll be interested to know where that belief comes from. But in the end, if there's no evidence to be looked at, you can't really get to any kind of balanced view on it. I mean, JFK is a classic one. Clearly, I think the majority of people know that they haven't told the truth about it, and more information keeps coming out. But it still doesn't lead you entirely to who was behind it. You can kind of make good guesses, but I think, so much documentation, if there was any originally anyway, it would have been destroyed by now. They're not stupid. Yeah. It's almost impossible to get to the bottom of it. But what you can do is say, okay, there is something here where clearly we were not told the truth. And another controversial example of that is 9/11. I mean, some polls say more people in the world don't believe the official story than do. Getting to the absolute number, what really did happen, is tricky, but you can certainly show that the official story, as opposed to what clearly actually happened, it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. And the minute you do that, people are going to speculate and come up with their own solutions. Of course, that is just a human way of dealing with the world. So, it absolutely should be reinvestigated. And there's a lot of other things like that. And you mentioned a few different things there. So we live in a world of doubt, and now digital fakery is easy. So it gets ever harder to be sure what evidence is. But I still think you can make a reasonable case that, okay, that stacks up to that level. That now needs to be looked at. I think that much at least we can say.
Yeah, because around 9/11, I've seen engineers talk about the almost impossibility of a building falling in that particular way. So you take the person's credentials and you say, well, they would know that this is not how a building would fall. They would know about a controlled demolition. They found evidence of explosive type of materials in the rubble. And then there's even the argument about the plane that hit the Pentagon and how it just evaporated into thin air. None of this makes sense. And you can say from a scientific perspective, it doesn't make any sense. But unfortunately, the official narrative that if you were to Google it in 30 years' time and you never lived through these incidences and you were surrounded by people who were getting on with their life, the truth that you would adopt would be the one that you would read in most online sources. And if we move to more AI, the AI answer you're going to be given will be the narrative, and you might not even consider to challenge what you've been told. So do we run the risk of losing the truth, or what could be the truth, because the official adjudicators, the government, the mainstream media, will never really adopt any of these more conspiratorial but potentially true theories?
Well, I suppose one issue here is, what does mainstream mean? Because, mainstream used to mean the BBC or CNN. Now it's Joe Rogan. More
Yeah,
people are watching Joe Rogan than are watching the ITV news,
yeah,
So you could argue that, in a way, the conspiracy thinking, it's not yet acknowledged by the mainstream media, who still believe they're the gatekeepers. But in terms of what people are engaging with and are believing, it's not necessarily reflected by mainstream thinking now. AI and Google Overview and all of these kinds of things, yes, of course, they can only take what is out there in the collective, and it will depend on how the AI and its algorithms are programmed as to what it will look at. But I think, and we're seeing this already, AI, which is a huge topic in itself, of course, it is already breaking ranks and beginning to look at things that I think it wasn't supposed to, and it cannot surely be unaware of all this vast volume of information that does challenge the official story on something like 9/11. So you'd
yeah.
like to think that, unless an Orwellian decision comes in that absolutely wipes all information that challenges, the official view, and I'm not saying that couldn't be tried. I'm sure they'd love to, some of them. But, if that proves impossible to do because there's so much other information around, it may well be that actually it will get looked at. And when AI gets so clever that it can just see for itself what the clear truth was, it might surprise us, and it might not back up the mainstream necessarily. I mean, if you look at JFK as a good example, so we're over 50 years on now, most people assume there was a wider conspiracy, that it wasn't just a
Oh,
lone
yeah,
gunman. There's a few that
yeah.
do still go down the official view. So, that's a sign that, okay, despite all the attempts to cover that up, it hasn't really worked. Another good example of that would be Princess Diana. Now, what's the truth? We don't know, but there's a lot of very odd things around her death. And, I mean, some polls say the majority of British people believe she was murdered. Doesn't matter what the inquest says. That's what they believe, because they've seen so much other evidence that doesn't really tie in with that. So I don't know. In the end, people vote with their feet, and if they believe something, the mainstream that, we now know has been shown to be not reliable, let's put it like that, all the time, that they know that they have to hold their own views on things. So on one level, that's dangerous, because we're now in this age where you don't know who to believe or what to believe anymore, and the old institutions are crumbling. On the other, it will help reveal some things that probably did need reevaluating. So I don't know where we'll be in 30 years' time, as say the way AI looks at things. It's all going to be down to how that AI is regulated. But there's always going to be people that will let it not be regulated. They're going to break its programming. They're going to let it look at everything. And it will be really interesting to see what it has to say.
Are there any conspiracies around AI that you're aware of?
I mean, the general thinking at the moment from those that don't trust it is that it is there basically to give incredible power to, big tech companies and individuals, and you can guess who some of those are, that possibly shouldn't have that power, but they do. AI can be very useful. There's no getting around it, right? And it's going to become an indelible part of our lives. Where I think the danger is that in the end, people will just give everything to AI. We'll lose the faculties to do it ourselves. So we're seeing that already. And it leaves us very malleable. When everything's just coming at you and being done for you, A, you probably won't have a job. B, how's the economy then going to work? But C, who are we in that world? What are we going to do? And some think that there is a plot basically to disenfranchise, to just keep us hypnotized by it all and leave us a bit useless at the end of the day because we're easier to control that way. Now, that might not be true, but it is something that, yeah, it is doing the rounds. And certainly sometimes you can understand that there are certainly big concerns about AI. There's no getting around it. It's raising enormous dilemmas. And what you can fake with it is now so astonishing that, yeah, it's created a world where we don't know the truth. So we never did, as I've already said. But yeah, it has certainly added a new dimension to that, certainly with visual evidence. And I think one of the concerns is, and we see this already, is the editing of original visual evidence that was there in the archives and seemingly genuine for a long time. It's now getting edited, and if somebody then wipes that original material, which I think comes back down to what you were suggesting here, you might lose the original evidence and will only be left with faked evidence, but you won't know. So that is an issue. We need to make sure that all original visual evidence for anything is preserved for comparison. But, you know, that's like 1984, where, you know, Orwell has Winston Smith burning old newspapers, as pre-digital, of course, to destroy the past. You know, there are people that fear that AI may well do that now. And once we're all reliant on it, you won't even know there was another version. So I do think that is something we do have to be really cautious of.
Yeah, definitely. And there are people who are in the business of cover-ups, and this is perhaps, as much as AI is a tool, it's a tool for covering up and distracting people from thinking about other topics in different angles. So you mentioned demons. You've also written about ghosts. What are your personal experiences with demons or ghosts or spirits or that kind of thing? Or what have you come across in your interactions with people who've had experiences with these entities?
So my most recent book, Strange, is a compilation really of all the work I've been doing on that for 30 years plus. I mean, I've been really lucky because I was asked quite early on when I started to look at crop circles and then other phenomena, you know, people found out and people said, oh, will you come and speak to my group about this or at this conference? And it was like, oh, okay. It was never planned. And of course, then over the years, I do a lot of lecturing now and writing. So people see me openly speaking about the paranormal and cover-ups and whatever. And of course, they're then going to feel less intimidated by sharing a story with me. And so people will come up to you after a talk and they'll share an incredible encounter they had with a ghost or a UFO or some psychic phenomenon that they experienced. And they'll open up, whereas they often won't have said that to anybody else because they're afraid of ridicule, because, you know, there is a stigma attached to all this in the mainstream. As I say, we're hoping to break that down, but it's strong even now. And so then I get an incredible glimpse into the lives of everyday folk, not people into this stuff. Often they're not particularly into it, but they've had an incredible encounter. And I thought, you know what, this is a really unique snapshot of everyday people. So I wrote up many of their reports into the book Strange, and I called it Paranormal Realities in the Everyday World, because that's what it is. There are people having clearly paranormal experiences. Yes, some can be explained by conventional things, but I think it's absolutely obvious not all of them. And it's something we should acknowledge more. And ghosts certainly are at the top of the list. I mean, around 1 in 10 people have seen a ghost or believe they've seen a ghost. And even if you rule out, say, 2/3 of that as, you know, misidentification, that's a lot of people. That's a big section of the human race. And clearly there's a phenomenon, whatever we think causes it. Just to say it's a trick of the brain makes no sense, because A, you've got visual images, B, you've got whole groups of people see ghosts, or people see different ghosts in the same place but at completely different times. You know what I mean? That's not one trick of the brain. It can't be. There is a recurring phenomenon there. And that's true of a lot of other paranormal phenomena. There is something going on that we've had a lid put on for so long, and it's been foolish because that's given us a false view of the world. The world is paranormal. The world
Mm.
is strange. Time and space is leaky, which is a phrase I use in the book. It doesn't run the way we think. And we know that anyway now from quantum science and things like that. But they don't want to apply that to the everyday world because they don't want to prove the mystics might have been right all along. So
Yeah.
that nobody wants to prove they were wrong. But the reality is science is taking us there anyway in a very curious loop. And it's going to be interesting to see again when the new technology like AI starts to investigate things like this. It might well conclude, oh, yeah, there is something here. Why didn't they acknowledge this? So again, that could, with all the nightmares that come with AI and whatnot. However, when we get to quantum computing becoming far more accessible, things like that, it's going to be able to calculate things, and it might work out that, yeah, a ghost is, say, an inevitable, byproduct of the way time and space work. So it might go, well, of course there's ghosts. So we're in this foolish world where you're not supposed to talk about it, but it's happening and people are reporting them. And what's been great about the strange book is that it has opened people up. Have people now saying, my God, I've just read something in your book, and that's what happened to me. And that's what I was hoping. And that people would then start to speak more openly about it because they're not alone. All this paranormal phenomena, it's there, it's going on, and we should talk about it.
So what are ghosts?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? So the book, I'm very careful in the book to explore all options and be quite scientific about it, but not in a reductionist way, because clearly there is something going on here. So, I explore different things. And here's the thing. I think there's more than one cause for a ghost and indeed other spiritual phenomena. I think the easiest way to look at it is there are clearly realms where consciousness exists. Now, it can be consciousness perhaps that previously existed, say, in the 3D world that we live in. I think it can be consciousness from other worlds that we don't every day interact with here. And I think there's, entities, if you want to call them that live on those realms. Now, we give them names. We call them angels, we call them demons, we call them aliens, we call them ghosts. And sometimes they're all of those things, but other times I think there's a crossover. And because time and space is not as straightforward as people think, and I think rips appear in the fabric of it, sounds very sci-fi, but I think that's what's going on. Things pass through and they enter our world, or we briefly enter their world, and things cross slightly, and that's when you have an encounter. Knowing exactly what you've seen is another matter. However, I think it is clear that consciousness in this world does exist when it passes into the next realms. I don't think it just ends. And I have met so many people who've had encounters with recently lost loved ones. And not just a brief glimpse in a mirror that people dismiss as, again, a trick of the mind. Some people have whole conversations. And what I hate is when you then get a reductionist medical scientist saying, oh, poor things. Well, of course, they wanted to see that, didn't they? So the brain tricked them. And when you actually read the circumstances of this, that cannot always be the case. And again, sometimes more than one person will witness that lost relative. So that suggests to me that there's other entities that perhaps are not related to people that have lived in existence here, but sometimes they are, and something remains of our consciousness, and it can cross back, seemingly willfully. And sometimes that's a beautiful experience. Sometimes it can be a darker experience. And there's no getting around it that trauma seems to generate more ghosts than a good event, so a traumatic death, and this is well recognized, but it's not really explored enough, seems to rip time and space apart, right? There's something about the energies of that horrific pain or the experience that you had that leaves an imprint, and those imprints can either replay or they've torn a hole where that entity can then come back and forth, and other entities then, it would seem, can be drawn to that portal, if you like. So I don't think it's straightforward. It's not always just one thing or another. But yeah, I mean, ghosts will often result, it would seem, from something bad that happened. And whether it is a spirit trapped somehow by that experience, that it hasn't yet moved fully on to where it should go, wherever that may be, or whether it is just some strange crack in time, replaying the visuals and the sounds of that event over and over, well, it could be both. It could sometimes be either, or it can sometimes be merged. But yeah, there's no question that events, and especially big events, leave a mark. They leave an imprint, and especially if you're sensitive to that, and some people are more psychically sensitive than others, that they can pick it up and it will replay for them, or they will meet the entity that passed through there. So it's all very complicated, but when you step back and look at it, and the book hopefully helps people to do that and look at all the possibilities, what you discover is it all meets in the middle somewhere, that there's other realms that we interact with. And there's different means by which we do it. But just to say, no, it never happens and it can't happen is just dumb when you look at the new science coming forward. I can't believe that state of mind can last for much longer, personally.
No, and I think as soon as there is a growing sense that these things are real and the possibilities are a lot broader than we've thought, then everything will start to be more widely considered. From ghost to different dimensions and that kind of thing. In terms of the human mind, consciousness or psychic abilities, what have you looked into regarding this?
Yes, I mean, there's a whole section in the Strange book about psychic phenomena. I mean, what does become clear is that consciousness, in my view, and the view of many other people now studying this, is not just a byproduct of this grey matter in here. It clearly can exist beyond that. I mean, out-of-body experiences and the projection of consciousness, it's now being explored. I mean, there's people that practice it, but it's happening more than most people acknowledge. And it's clear that we can detach from this and have a separate existence. And that suggests that it is not all just bound up in here, that, what we are exists on a number of different levels. So it's almost like, the flesh, it's the radio receiver, but it's not necessarily the signal. And it's not nothing. The flesh matters, and it clearly can influence and filter, consciousness. And the brain's not sitting there doing nothing. However, there is another existence we have that can transcend that. And I mean, what's interesting now, if you look at the whistleblowers like Joe McMonigal and Lou Elizondo, and, they're in the UFO world as well, but they've revealed that the US, for instance, has now had a long program of training people to do remote viewing where they project their consciousness out of their bodies, because this is what a fantastic espionage tool, and with some success. And the fact that they're clearly training people to do this tells you they know it works. And if the US is doing it, then you better guess that China and Russia must surely also be doing the same thing. And we know that back in the 70s, Chinese and the Russians, were openly experimenting with this kind of thing, and then it all kind of went quiet. And that's what happened in America too. And the CIA said, we didn't find any faculties there. Well, you want to say that, don't you? Because if you admit it, you're then going to have to talk about a lot of things you don't want to talk about. But it is now clear from the whistleblowers coming forward that it is going on, and they know it all works. So there is an acknowledgement there, really, from the highest levels that we are not just a blob. We are much more than that, and we interact with other layers of consciousness and existences, which is very exciting. But wouldn't it be nice if we just began to talk openly about that, and not constantly fear the ridicule, which has kept it down for years, as I suspect, was the idea.
Well, even former presidents have spoken about how they've used remote viewing to locate downed aircraft to within miles of where it was actually discovered. So I'm not sure if he was meant to discuss that openly, but he sort of gave the game away in that respect. And other than remote viewing, what else do you think our minds are capable of doing?
I mean, we have to debate what mind means in that. I mean, one thing that I've come across from a number of people over the years is that we do seem to have the ability to slip backwards and forwards in time. That there's some cases in the book of time slips where people have literally found themselves back in the past. There's a good case, and I knew him personally, a man called Tony. He's passed now, but he used to drive a bakery van in and out of London in the 60s and 70s. One day he was driving down a road, and it kind of changed in front of him, and suddenly there were people walking past in like Edwardian costumes, and there were horse-drawn carriages and very early cars, and he thought, hey, they must be doing a film here or something, I must have wandered onto a film set. But he then realised, the more he looked, that he'd just gone back in time somehow. We don't know. And it looked like his whole car had, not just his mind, because he was sitting there in his car, which was in that road. But the interesting thing is they couldn't see him. Nobody.
I was going to say, what must they have been thinking?
They didn't react to him, so there must have been some element of projection here. But one thing he said was that he really wanted to get out and explore, but he had the strong feeling that if he did that, he wouldn't be able to get back. The minute he did that, he'd be in that time zone and he wouldn't get back. So he just sat. And then in the end, it faded and just went back to the modern day street. But there's other cases like that. And I've heard that from a few people. They've been walking and suddenly it's like they're in a street or a place as it was, not as it was then. And they didn't know what to do. And they just kind of held fast and then it passed. So whether that is time doing that or our minds slipping back somehow through some resonance with something that happened at that place. I mean, we can't be sure. But I think that we are capable of far more than we think we are. That much, I think, is true. And because there are no easy answers. Of course, a skeptic would say, well, there you go, you can't explain it. But neither can they, other than just saying you imagined it. And that's where it's very lazy. And that's why I don't think reductionist thinking is helpful to anyone. Yes, sometimes they're right. Of course they are. There can be mundane explanations for some things, but I think it's clear, certainly not for all things.
And have you ever come across time travel or time travelers or any evidence of people that have traveled back in time and changed events or anything like that?
So, I mean, beyond the time slip stories, no. I mean, I've never come across someone who's claimed to have been a time traveler. There are claims out there. And there is I can't remember the name now. There was a chap that did claim to have come from the future. And, I mean, you don't know. There are claims that has happened. And of course it's been covered up. I don't think there's any very, very clear evidence. I think I have to just sort of say I'm open to that it might have happened, but certainly not personally, no. But wouldn't it be amazing? But they'd need some pretty good evidence. Although whether people should be time traveling, given the mess you could leave of timelines and the classic sci-fi way, is a whole other matter. But maybe it's happening all the time and we don't know. And timelines are being shifted all the time. We're in one continuum moving forward, so we don't recognize it's going on around us. But I don't know. You like to, in a way, think time travel isn't possible because the mess that creates, is probably not a great thing.
Yeah, definitely. So bringing this back to crop circles, what do you think they are? What do you think causes them? And what are your thoughts on crop circles?
So it's not straightforward, like any strange phenomena. And again, I know the media would like to believe it is straightforward. So they long ago concluded it's all man-made. It's a big joke. It's just clever artists. And yes, some of that goes on. Everybody knows that. However, when you look at the evidence, it's very clear that they were inspired by a phenomenon that was already there. I mean, you've got centuries worth of reports of crop circles. I mean, I'll just give you three classic ones. You've got the famous mowing devil of 1678, showing the devil making circles in a field. The description that goes with that is clearly describing crop circles. So Robert Plot, just a few years after that, wrote about crop circles. He thought the weather was creating them. In 1818, the Nature journal, big famous scientific journal, plainly reports crop circles. So you've got photographs going back to the 1930s, and some are contentious, others less so.
It must have been Doug and Dave's granddads.
Yeah, well, indeed, that's a problem. So when Doug and Dave, the retired gentleman that came forward saying they'd made them all in 91, arrived and claimed they'd invented it all in around 1978, although that story kept shifting, they were clearly liars because they didn't invent it. And yes, I'm sure they made some, but the ones they made weren't terribly good and could not possibly have explained many of the masterpieces they were claiming. So it is a phenomenon that has a long history. So you can look at that two ways. Maybe there is a mechanism in nature that can create certain shapes. And we know you've got dust devils, you can get very localized atmospheric effects. So it could well be that some formations can be caused by that. I've interviewed a number of eyewitnesses over the years. That is another thing that says to me they are not all man-made. and I believe them to be credible. And there's too much of that going on for it to just be all lies and it be nothing. So there is a phenomenon, that much we know. It accelerated in its complexity from the kind of mid-80s onwards especially, but 1990 was the big cut-off point where it just became nearly all complex formations. And then I think you're into that, why did it do it? Now, was that then an intelligent force learning to use a mechanism that already existed in nature to nudge that to make its own patterns? That is one theory. So it might be there's more than one cause for a crop circle, you see. And then people, of course, started to copy them, as inevitably they were going to. Then you got the man-made element in. So there's probably a lot of different ways that a crop circle can occur. How many you want to believe are weather-made, man-made, alien-made, whatever theory you have, is a personal choice. But we don't know. Yes, we know some are man-made, absolutely. We all get that. And probably more these days proportionally than the old days, because there seem to be less formations now, even though we do still get some extraordinary formations. So you're left, in a way, having to choose your theory. And in a way, it's always been like that. And journalists hate that. They want you to say it's an alien, or they want you to have a very firm theory. And that's why they go for the man-made theory, mostly, because it's easy. You show a man with a bit of wood smashing down the plants. Well, there you go. It's a good, strong image. It's not vague. We come along and say, well, it could be a bit of this, it could be a bit of that. Yeah, that's not a news story.
Yeah.
But that's the truth. And it may be consciousness from my own experiments I was involved with in the 1990s might also influence this phenomenon. There's a lot of things. Something is extra-dimensional rather than extraterrestrial. And it might well be there are influences coming through from all those realms. As we mentioned earlier, these realms all merge in the middle in the end. But we don't know for sure. All we can say is that these things have been going on for a long time. They can be very inspirational for people, and that's true, wherever they come from. And they're very mysterious, and there's many, many unanswered questions about them. And that is after like more than 35 years of very intensive research, probably longer than that. So it's not an easy one to answer, but where crop circles, I think, are special is that unlike a UFO, where you've got to be in the right place at the right time, or a ghost, come to that, you can actually say, there's a crop circle there, let's go and look at it and examine it. And that's a real change in the world of paranormal phenomena, because normally it's not like that. And with this, in a way, it's made it more controversial, that you can actually take somebody by the hand and say, here you are, here's the evidence.
Yeah.
It's enabled, in a way, more kind of fierce debate rather than less, because everybody can look at them. So, yeah, it's a really fascinating phenomenon, and it's controversial. It always will be. But here, the fact that we're still speaking about it now, 35 years since the big Doug and Dave debunk, tells you that it hasn't been adequately explained. And I doubt that it ever will be. For all the man-made ones, there's this element that is just always elusive, which makes it more intriguing.
Yeah, and I took a look at your site, the Circle Research Archive, the Crop Circle Research Archive, and I looked through the documents of the crop circles year by year and as they went through. And it's just extraordinary how beautiful they are. So if they were to be man-made, I would have to say that this is an artist that deserves the recognition. But the fact that they're made overnight so quickly, and that scientifically you can see that the nodes on the crops have been elongated, and they're not just like bent over or pushed down with a plank of wood. Surely anybody with, the faculties should be able to say, look, this isn't man-made. This is worth exploring too. And it's almost like this should be a gateway for you to then explore all of these other mysteries that we look into, because crop circles don't come across creepy or scary like a ghost or a demon or anything like that. They are profoundly beautiful. They fall within nature, and they draw you to ask so many questions because you just don't know what they are.
I think that's quite right. I mean, we should say, though, just to stress that you say they appear overnight. Well, they can do. They can also appear in daylight. There's a lot of very good documentation of ones occurring in very short periods of time. And that in itself is a big point, because when people make crop circles, yes, some of them have got good and they're creative in their own right. However, you look at the length of time it takes to make some of them, and yet we know many huge formations have occurred in really short periods of time, because we know when the field was empty, we know when it was then found. You immediately realize, okay, that cannot explain all of them. There are some you could not make. They're taking hours sometimes more than a day to create the more elaborate formations. Others can be done in a shorter time. But some of the bigger ones they tried to make have taken so long. All they do is demonstrate that they can't explain the whole phenomenon. You mentioned the science, and if you go to the Circle Research Archive website, and by the way, I pay tribute to Barry Reynolds, who's been like one of the key drivers of that. I'm involved, of course, but he is absolutely doing amazing work there. But by uploading all these scientific papers, people can see for themselves the amount of work that has been done looking scientifically at crop circles over the years. Now, again, skeptics carp, they say, oh, I don't take that seriously. They've never managed to actually disprove all that scientific work that was done. It's easier to dismiss it than engage with it. And that's the problem we always have with paranormal research. The science, I think, stands up well. And there should be more of it done today. But because of the stigma in the media, right, no scientific body now will get involved with crop circles. They don't want to be seen to be wasting money and time, so they leave it. But that's sad. They should still be looking at it. But there was certainly very good evidence when the work was being done properly that there was a good number of formations that had effects inside, not only at a cellular level, but at a visible level, as you mentioned, nodal changes, things like this, that simply could not be replicated by man-made formations, and people tried. So, this is a whole other aspect to it. And what we're trying to do with the Circle Research Archive is show people how much evidence has been gathered over the years. Because what we've got, is good, is that a lot of like UFO podcasts, for instance, that have really got going in the last few years, they're kind of rediscovering crop circles. They're getting excited, but they don't seem to be aware of all the incredible research that's been done in previous decades. And part of the reason for that is it's not so easy to find in one source. So what we're doing is putting a lot of material all in one source. So you can see the science, you can see the geological maps, which reveal, for instance, the majority of crop circles in southern England are near chalk or greensand. Even though there's loads of other fields available where that's not the case, they don't get crop circles. Well, if it's all a big hoax, you can make them anywhere you like. That's not what's happening. So there's a geological, natural element clearly in here, whatever else is influencing them. All of that, when you start to see the maps and the data that's on the website, it becomes clearer that there's an incredible volume of knowledge out there about the circles, but it's either been forgotten or it hasn't had the publicity it deserves. And some of it never went online originally. So we're taking papers that were in journals and didn't get widely distributed. We're making them online now, with permission, I should say, and saying to people, okay, this is actually an incredible body of evidence that makes really clear that there is a phenomenon here that still needs further exploration. So, and it is astonishing. Yeah, anybody that wants a starting point, go to circleresearcharchive.com and you'll find, well, you'll be there probably for months, and we're putting more material up all the time. It's very exciting to have got that out there after all these years, all in one source.
Yeah, it's a fascinating source, and thank you to you and Barry for your work on that. We've discussed your last book, Strange. What are you currently working on?
So, at the moment, my next big project is the conference at the end of July. So I'm part of the Glastonbury Symposium. That's been running for 36 years now, where we have 3 days in the heart of Glastonbury, beautiful place, discussing everything from the paranormal, mysteries, cover-ups, freedom issues, spirituality, health. It all joins up in the middle for us. And we believe that people gathering, if you can, together with other human beings, it is very different to reading something online or watching YouTube. That has its place. But if you can be there in person, it's funny, you then interact with people, like-minded individuals, you share ideas. It's a real gathering spot. And it's been a very strong part of a lot of people's lives for years. So if you look up Glastonbury Symposium.co.uk, aka the Expand Your Horizons conference, you'll discover what we do there. And if you're interested in any of the things we talked about today, that's going to be the place for you to be. And it does matter, because I think in a world where, we're getting distracted by a lot of online stuff, just to come together, or even if you watch online with streaming, and you can do that as well, it's still, nonetheless, it focuses you. It focuses everybody together, and threads, themes usually arise among the speakers, even without that being planned, where you tap into the zeitgeist to where this is all at the moment in the world. And I think it can help people kind of go out from that afterwards and be more primed, and it addresses some of the madness going on in the world as well, and gives a balance to that, and gives a bit of context and a bit of common sense and something to go for. So it's a very positive event. We acknowledge the difficulties in the world and the darker bits, but it's also ultimately a very bright event, saying, okay, here's where we can go with this. We can do something with this. The Glastonbury Symposium, I've been very proud to have been a part of the organisation team for, again, more than 3 decades now, and still going strong. So, that's really my next thing. I'm just promoting it and getting everything ready. After that, I do plan another book about crop circles, because there's a little bit more to say there. I'm working on that. Again, aim more at bringing new people in and drawing them into the information, so that it's a good starting point. Because again, in the world of books, people don't always know where to start. There's older books out there, but you one source. And I've tried to do that with previous crop circle books, but the years move on, and you constantly need to doing updates. So there will be a new crop circle book at some point, I hope, within the next 6 months or so. Fingers crossed.
Nice, I'll definitely keep a lookout for that. And in terms of the Glastonbury Symposium, you said there's some speakers who will be speaking at this year's symposium.
Yes, there will. Yeah, I mean, we got some amazing people there. So, you've got people like Professor Chris Rowe. Now, he is part of the Society for Psychical Research. He is one of the few scientific-minded people that has acknowledged the paranormal is real. And Chris has been doing amazing work. So to get him, it is a real coup, because he crosses into the mainstream. But we've also got the crop circle researcher Veli-Martin Kartel from Finland. He's been doing amazing work with crop circles over the years. We've got Dave Hodrian, an incredible UFO researcher, talking about that and disclosure, of course, and other people will be covering all different aspects. We've got Maya Bracknell-Watson talking about psychedelic entities, and, that's a whole other thing. People are exploring those realms to try to get into the other realms and saying, look, there's something here that is recurring for lots of people. So we're not tripping here. We're actually making contact with something. So that's a fascinating area as well. And everything in between. And John Siddiq, very well-known spiritual writer, saying again, right, okay, the world's bonkers, but this is what we can do. So it's about like fortifying people to go out there and deal with it, because it is tricky at the moment. There's a lot of stuff in the world that can weigh you down, and it can be, not nice to wade through. But when you've got a little bit of kind of bolstering, and you've got a balance, and you see there's all these people doing these incredible things out there that you don't hear about on the news, trying to create a brighter world, it gives you hope. And that's what we're there to do.
Yeah, there's so many topics that it feels like we're barely scratching the surface of all the things that are true and possible in this world, realm, dimension, whatever you want to call it. And it feels like, the symposium is going to be fascinating to delve into all these topics, and hopefully from that can inspire a few more minds to dig a little deeper themselves. So is there anything you want to leave the viewers, listeners with, a final message?
Well, I would say, if you are open to the paranormal and the mysterious, it is to speak openly about it. Don't keep it under a lid, which is what we're supposed to do. If you've had an experience, share it with people. Face the ridicule, get over that. Because what I've discovered is when you actually are genuine and you share something, actually people in the end stop giggling and go, well, tell me a bit more about it then. And then you'll discover maybe something happened to them. And the more people speak openly about all these things, the more they share their interest in UFOs and crop circles and all of these things, it will be hard to stigmatize it. That's where things are going, hopefully. I mean, online has enabled people to have those conversations better, but it would be nice to spread that into everyday society. And when people do have something happen to them, they don't feel so alone then. They feel they can share it, and we'll hopefully get to a better understanding. And if anybody's interested in my work, and there's lots of videos and things to read, have a look at my website, truthagenda.org. Loads of different things to see there, and links, and you'll see there all my books and links to other sources as well that people might be interested in.
Brilliant. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's gone all over the shop, from conspiracies to demons, dimensions, crop circles, and more. So it's been absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, I hope everything goes well at the Glastonbury Symposium soon.
Thank you.